The conflict between Israel and Palestine is viewed by Christians as a spiritual battle that has spanned millennia, anchored in ancient prophecies and sacred promises. Politically, it's seen as a long-standing dispute over territory and national identity. Regardless of perspective, this conflict stands as one of the most complex and persistent in world history. In this video, we'll explore the origins of this animosity by delving into biblical accounts, prophecies, and the tangible developments that have fueled this intense rivalry, providing an in-depth analysis like never before. Before you proceed, remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel for further insights into how ancient prophecies intertwine with contemporary events. The historical roots of the Israel-Palestine conflict can be traced back to biblical times, specifically to the narrative of Abraham and his sons, Isaac and Ishmael. Abraham is revered as the forefather of both Jews and Arabs, and was promised by God that his offspring would inherit the land known as Canaan, Genesis 12:1-3. The pivotal moment of division stems from the succession of this promise. Abraham fathered two sons, Ishmael with Hagar, an Egyptian servant, and Isaac with his wife Sarah when they were advanced in age. The biblical narrative states that God's covenant would continue through Isaac, who fathered Jacob, the progenitor of the Israelites. This divine assurance of territory and blessings to Isaac's lineage is fundamental to the Jewish entitlement to the land of Israel, Genesis 17:19-21. However, Ishmael was also bestowed with a divine promise in Genesis 16:10-12, where God foretold that Ishmael would be the progenitor of a mighty nation. Traditionally, Ishmael's descendants are recognized as the Arab people, including Palestinians. This ancestral split lays the groundwork for the ongoing conflict, as both Jews and Arabs trace their lineage back to Abraham and claim the land of Canaan as integral to their heritage. At the core of the Israel-Palestine dispute is the ownership of what is now Israel, a territory both parties view as their rightful homeland. For Jews, this land represents not merely a place of residence, but the realization of a divine vow. God's pledges to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob encompass the territory of Canaan, present-day Israel and Palestine, designated as a perpetual legacy for their progeny, Genesis 15:18-21. This covenant is echoed throughout the Old Testament, notably in agreements with Moses and King David. Furthermore, the scriptures in Ezekiel 37 and Isaiah 66 foresee the restoration of Israel, depicting a time when Israelites will return from diaspora and reclaim their land. These visions were perceived by many as coming to fruition in 1948, when Israel was established as a nation-state following nearly 2 millennia of dispersion in the aftermath of the Holocaust. For Palestinians, who often consider themselves the descendants of Ishmael and see a lineage back to the ancient Canaanites and other local tribes, the land also represents their ancestral territory. They have inhabited this area for generations, forging a profound connection with the land. This conflict over land rights goes far beyond simple political arguments. It is deeply interwoven with issues of identity, faith, and historical entitlement. The creation of the State of Israel in 1948 stands as a landmark and contentious event in the history of the Middle East. For the Jewish community, this was a time of celebration, seen as the realization of long-held prophecies and the reclamation of their homeland after centuries of diaspora. Conversely, for Palestinians, this event marked the onset of ongoing displacement and sorrow, leading to what they refer to as the Nakba, or the catastrophe. To fully comprehend the significance of the year 1948, it's essential to explore the historical, political, and emotional factors that have defined the Israel-Palestine conflict as we see it today. The origins of this conflict trace back to the establishment of the State of Israel, necessitating an understanding of the precursors to its creation. The discord between Jews and Arabs in Palestine began crystallizing in the late 19th century with the emergence of the Zionist movement, initiated by Theodor Herzl in 1897. Zionism emerged as a call for the establishment of a Jewish homeland, spurred by prolonged persecution, including pogroms in Eastern Europe and Russia. During this period, Palestine was under Ottoman rule and predominantly inhabited by Arab Muslims, with smaller communities of Christians and Jews. Despite this, the Zionist movement identified Palestine as the ancestral homeland of the Jewish people, rooted in biblical connections and historical claims. The early 20th century saw a surge in Jewish migration to Palestine, driven by Zionist goals and the increasing peril faced by Jews in Europe. This influx was significantly boosted by the Balfour Declaration of 1917, wherein the British government endorsed the idea of creating a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. The declaration, while met with enthusiasm by the Jewish population, planted the roots of discord with the Arab residents, who perceived it as a British betrayal. This sentiment stemmed from earlier British promises to support Arab independence if they aided in the fight against the Ottoman Empire during World War I. Following the Ottoman defeat in 1918, the British assumed control over Palestine under the auspices of a League of Nations mandate, effectively taking on the administrative duties in the region. In the ensuing years, Jewish immigration and land acquisitions continued to rise, intensifying the already simmering tensions between the Jewish settlers and the Arab populace. Throughout the 1920s and 1930s, these tensions occasionally erupted into violent clashes between the two communities. The land, cherished by both, became the focal point of their growing nationalist movements, Zionism for the Jews and Arab nationalism for the Palestinians. The tensions heightened in the 1930s as Jewish immigration increased dramatically, partly driven by the rise of Nazi Germany. The escalating numbers of Jewish arrivals stoked fears among Palestinian Arabs of being outnumbered and possibly dominated, prompting calls to restrict Jewish immigration and land ownership. These concerns culminated in the Arab Revolt from 1936 to 1939, a major uprising against both the British rule and the Jewish communities, marked by significant violence. The British harshly quelled the revolt, exacerbating Palestinian grievances and reinforcing the Jewish commitment to establishing a secure homeland. The horrors of World War II and the Holocaust intensified the urgency for establishing a Jewish homeland. The systematic annihilation of 6 million Jews by the Nazis underscored the survivors' resolve to secure a safe haven from persecution. Palestine emerged as the primary refuge for many Jews. Post-war, tens of thousands of Jewish refugees, including numerous Holocaust survivors, sought entry into Palestine. However, faced with rising Arab resistance and complex geopolitical issues, the British government implemented stringent limits on Jewish immigration. This restriction spurred Jewish paramilitary groups like the Haganah, Irgun and Lehi to initiate violent resistance against British authorities, advocating for the abolition of immigration constraints and the end of British governance. Overwhelmed by the aftermath of the war and escalating conflicts, the British handed over the Palestine question to the United Nations in 1947. The United Nations, confronting the intensifying Jewish-Arab conflicts, proposed a partition plan in 1947 designed to establish two independent states, one Jewish and one Arab, with Jerusalem under international governance due to its profound significance to Jews, Christians and Muslims. The plan allocated 55% of the territory for the Jewish state and 45% for the Arab state, with Jerusalem to be internationally managed. To the Jewish community, who had aspired for their own state, The UN's proposal was a significant, albeit imperfect, victory, as many considered the proposed Jewish state's boundaries too constricted and disjointed. For Palestinians and the broader Arab world, the UN partition plan was perceived as a severe injustice. At that time, despite Jews constituting only about 30% of the population and owning under 10% of the land in Palestine, the plan allocated the majority of the territory to the nascent Jewish state, including areas densely populated by Arabs. The Arab leadership universally condemned the plan as a colonial imposition that infringed upon the rights of the indigenous Arab populace. They maintained that all of Palestine should form a single Arab state, viewing the increasing Jewish settlement as an illegitimate act of colonization. While Jewish leaders, under the guidance of David Ben-Gurion, accepted the plan, albeit with reservations, they saw it as a crucial step towards realizing their long-sought goal of statehood, despite not gaining control over Jerusalem. On May 14, 1948, coinciding with the expiration of the British Mandate, David Ben-Gurion officially proclaimed the establishment of the State of Israel. The following day marked the onset of military intervention by Egypt, Jordan, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, as these nations launched an invasion aimed at dismantling the fledgling state. This conflict, known as the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, represents a seminal event in regional history, celebrated in Israel as the War of Independence and mourned by Palestinians as the Nakba, or catastrophe, denoting the profound loss and displacement it triggered. As Israel engaged in a fierce battle for its existence, the impact on the Palestinian population was catastrophic. Over 700,000 Palestinians were displaced during the conflict, driven from their homes by fear or forcibly removed by Israeli forces. Many Palestinian villages were not only emptied, but also destroyed. These displaced individuals sought refuge in neighboring countries such as Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, and Egypt, or relocated to the West Bank and Gaza Strip. The reasons behind this mass exodus remain a subject of intense debate. Israeli historians often suggest that many Palestinians left voluntarily, anticipating that the Arab nations would quickly defeat Israel, while Palestinian scholars highlight the forced expulsions conducted by Jewish militias during operations like Plan Dalet, which was designed to secure the fledgling state's borders. Regardless of the differing interpretations of these events, the outcome was a vast number of stateless Palestinians and a profound sense of injustice that continues to perpetuate the conflict. The 1949 armistice agreements concluded the hostilities, leaving Israel with control over 78% of what had historically been Palestine. The remaining territories, the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip, fell under Jordanian and Egyptian administration, respectively, until Israel seized these areas during the 1967 Six-Day War. For Palestinians, the Nakba transcends a mere historical event. It is a profound and defining trauma that shapes their national identity. The displacement from 1948 engendered a persistent Palestinian refugee crisis, with millions still residing in refugee camps in neighboring Arab countries, as well as in the West Bank and Gaza, or dispersed worldwide. The right of return remains a pivotal issue in the Israel-Palestine conflict, with Palestinian refugees and their descendants seeking the right to return to their ancestral homes from which they fled or were expelled in 1948. For Palestinians, the year 1948 marks the erasure of their homeland, the dismantling of their society, and the onset of their statelessness. Annually on May 15th, Palestinians observe Nakba Day, a day of mourning and protest over the loss of their territory and a call for the acknowledgement of their rights. This commemoration and the enduring memory of the Nakba continue to stir deep-seated resentment and drive the Palestinian pursuit of justice, restitution, and the aspiration for an independent state. The events of 1948 set the stage for the enduring Israel-Palestine conflict. The establishment of Israel marked a moment of triumph and restoration for Jews, while for Palestinians it signified catastrophe and dispossession, crafting two divergent national narratives. These opposing perspectives have deeply influenced the collective identities of both groups, complicating the pursuit of peace. The Nakba, central to the Palestinian call for self-determination, justice, and the right of return, contrasts starkly with the Israeli commemoration of 1948 as a realization of an ancient dream of return and statehood. The enduring impact of these events casts a persistent shadow over peace efforts, with each side viewing the historical significance of 1948 through vastly different lenses. The Six-Day War of 1967 further complicated this dynamic, marking a pivotal moment in Middle Eastern history. For Israel, the war was a rapid and decisive victory that expanded its borders and solidified its regional standing. For Palestinians and the neighboring Arab states, however, it signified the start of a protracted Israeli occupation of the West Bank, East Jerusalem, Gaza Strip, and Golan Heights, deepening the conflict and sparking international debate. The ramifications of this brief yet profound conflict have echoed through the decades, impacting the political, social, and spiritual realms of the region. A comprehensive understanding of the Six-Day War and its consequences is essential for grasping the complex roots and enduring challenges of the Israel-Palestine conflict, which continues to shape the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East today. The Six-Day War emerged from a backdrop of mounting tensions among Israel and its neighboring Arab nations, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, and Iraq. These strains intensified after Israel's establishment in 1948. The conflict of 1948, known to Israelis as the War of Independence and to Palestinians as the Nakba or catastrophe, deeply entrenched hostilities. Key Arab nations, especially Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, did not acknowledge Israel's legitimacy and sought to overturn the events of 1948, driven by Arab nationalism and led by Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser. The aim was to rally Arab states against Israel. The conflict left several territorial disputes unresolved, notably concerning the West Bank under Jordanian control, the Gaza Strip managed by Egypt, and the Syrian-held Golan Heights. In the period leading up to the Six-Day War, Israel and its neighboring countries, such as Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, frequently engaged in minor conflicts and border disputes, highlighting the struggle for control over these regions. The Suez Crisis in 1956 further fueled the tension, with Israel, alongside Britain and France, launching an invasion into Egypt after Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal. This action, although reversed due to global pressure, exacerbated the bitterness between Israel and Egypt and set the stage for continued disputes. Additionally, the Cold War's dynamics influenced regional alignments, with Arab states like Egypt and Syria receiving support from the Soviet Union, whereas Israel, despite various sources of international arms and economic aid, began to forge stronger ties with the United States and other Western nations. By May 1967, the situation had escalated significantly when Nasser decided to blockade the Straits of Tiran, cutting off Israel's access to the Red Sea via the port of Eilat, a critical maritime route. Israel interpreted this blockade as an act of aggression, and diplomatic attempts to resolve the crisis were unsuccessful. Surrounded by hostile forces from Egypt, Syria, Jordan, and Iraq, all of whom were ramping up military activities at its borders, Israel felt increasingly threatened. On June 5, 1967, Israel took decisive action by initiating a preemptive assault on Egypt called Operation Focus. This strategic airstrike, aimed at disabling Egypt's air capabilities, effectively destroyed most of Egypt's air force on the ground, securing air superiority for Israel and crippling Egypt's military capacity as the war unfolded. During the six-day period of intense conflict, Israel engaged in battles across multiple fronts against Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, securing remarkable triumphs. By the conclusion of the conflict on June 10, 1967, Israel had expanded its boundaries significantly by capturing the Sinai Peninsula and Gaza Strip from Egypt, taking over the West Bank and East Jerusalem from Jordan, and seizing the Golan Heights from Syria. This rapid expansion tripled Israel's territory, drastically altering the geopolitical landscape of the region. The taking of East Jerusalem, which included the historically and religiously significant Old City, held deep religious and political implications. This area, revered in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, added to the gravity of Israel's victory, which was hailed domestically as a miraculous affirmation of its military strength. The aftermath of the Six-Day War introduced a new status quo, with Israel assuming control over substantial Arab populations in the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem, marking the start of the Israeli occupation of these areas. The annexation of the West Bank and Gaza placed over 1 million Palestinians under Israeli military governance, setting the stage for prolonged conflict and complex socio-political challenges. This occupation has become a central and highly disputed issue in the Israel-Palestine conflict, with Palestinians in these territories advocating for autonomy and the creation of an independent Palestinian state. The ongoing Israeli occupation and the expansion of settlements in the West Bank have drawn significant international criticism. The unification of East and West Jerusalem under Israeli control, marked by Israel's capture of the eastern part, stands as a particularly symbolic aspect of the conflict. The Western Wall, Judaism's holiest site, came under Israeli jurisdiction for the first time in nearly 2 millennia. Conversely, for Palestinians and much of the Arab community, the loss of East Jerusalem represents a significant defeat, as it houses critical Islamic religious sites like the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock. Meanwhile, Israel's acquisition of the Golan Heights from Syria has provided a strategic military benefit, serving as a protective buffer against potential northern threats. Despite this, the Syrian government persistently calls for its return, placing the Golan Heights at the forefront of Israeli-Syrian tensions. The Six-Day War also intensified the Palestinian refugee issue, with hundreds of thousands of Palestinians either fleeing or being displaced from the newly occupied regions, adding to the substantial refugee population that emerged from the 1948 Nakba. The inability of displaced Palestinians to return to their homes has continued to fuel deep-seated resentment and significantly hinder peace efforts in the region. Israel's remarkable victory in the Six-Day War can be attributed not only to its strategic military execution, but also to the substantial support it received from international allies. The United States emerged as Israel's primary military supporter, providing crucial assistance despite not directly participating in the conflict. This support included a substantial influx of funding, weaponry, and diplomatic backing. During the 1960s, American foreign policy in the Middle East was heavily influenced by the Cold War dynamics, particularly the competition with the Soviet Union, which was actively supporting Arab nations like Egypt and Syria. Viewing Israel as a pivotal regional ally, the US supplied Israel with advanced military hardware such as aircraft, tanks, and artillery. Notably, the Israeli Air Force, which played a key role in securing victory, was outfitted with high-performance aircraft like the French Mirage jets and American F-4 Phantom jets. Moreover, the US provided Israel with diplomatic support at the United Nations, advocating for ceasefire resolutions during the conflict, but without undermining Israel's strategic objectives. This combination of military and diplomatic aid was instrumental in enabling Israel to execute its comprehensive military strategy during the Six-Day War. Before the Six-Day War, France was Israel's principal provider of military hardware. During the 1950s and early 1960s, France was instrumental in enhancing Israel's military capacity, notably through the sale of Mirage III fighter jets, which were crucial in securing Israeli air superiority. However, post-war, France shifted its stance, moving towards a more neutral alignment and fostering closer ties with Arab nations. In addition to government-backed support, significant contributions to Israel's military funding came from private Jewish organizations and diaspora communities, especially those in the United States. These groups actively fundraised to support military procurements, humanitarian efforts, and infrastructure development within Israel, bolstering its defense capabilities and state-building efforts. Conversely, Egypt, Syria, and Jordan received substantial support from the Soviet Union, which viewed these Arab countries as key allies in the Cold War context, aiming to extend its influence in the Middle East. The Soviet Union provided these nations with extensive military assistance, including training, arms, and financial aid, equipping their forces with tanks, aircraft, and artillery. Despite the significant Soviet backing, the Arab states struggled with poor military coordination and strategic planning, which left them vulnerable to Israel's well-executed preemptive strike and advanced military tactics during the war. The Six-Day War was a pivotal event that reshaped the Middle East. Israel not only ensured its continued existence, but also greatly enlarged its territory. However, the subsequent occupation of Palestinian territories, including the West Bank and Gaza, set the stage for ongoing conflict, marked by decades of unrest, uprisings, and cycles of violence. In response to the war's outcomes, the United Nations Security Council adopted Resolution 242. This resolution demanded the withdrawal of Israeli forces from the territories occupied during the conflict, and called for the acknowledgement of every state's right to live in peace within secure and recognized boundaries. While Resolution 242 formed the cornerstone for subsequent peace negotiations, its vague language, particularly regarding the scope of Israeli withdrawal, has allowed for varied interpretations and remains a key point of contention in the ongoing Israel-Palestine conflict. Following the war, the Israeli settlement movement gained momentum, with new settlements emerging in the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem. These settlements are considered illegal by the international community according to international law, and their continued expansion over the years has significantly altered the demographic and political landscape. This has further entangled the prospects for a two-state solution, embedding deeper complexities into the peace process. The Six-Day War significantly propelled Palestinian nationalism, leading to the emergence and strengthening of movements such as Fatah and the Palestinian Liberation Organization, PLO, spearheaded by Yasser Arafat. These groups began to vocally advocate for the creation of an independent Palestinian state and engaged in both political maneuvers and armed resistance to pursue their objectives. The occupation itself became not just a daily burden for Palestinians, but also a powerful impetus for their resistance movements. The Six-Day War extends beyond a mere military skirmish. It was a transformative event that redefined the geopolitical landscape of the modern Middle East and set the framework for the enduring Israel-Palestine conflict. Israel's swift victory and the ensuing occupation of the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem laid the groundwork for ongoing strife, uprisings, and repeated cycles of violence. The enduring issues stemming from the war, such as the occupation, the displacement of people, the expansion of settlements, and the continuous battle over Jerusalem, remain central to the Israel-Palestine dispute, with each side firmly rooted in its perspectives. Reflecting on the events of 1967 highlights that the Six-Day War was not merely a historical flashpoint, but a pivotal moment that drastically shaped the future trajectory of the Middle East, embedding deep-seated challenges that continue to affect the region to this day. At the core of the religious perspective on the Israel-Palestine conflict is the covenant that God established with Abraham, which extends to his descendants. This covenant encompasses not only the people of Israel, but also a specific territory, the land of Canaan, which was promised as a perpetual inheritance to Abraham's progeny. In the book of Genesis, God instructs Abraham to leave his homeland for a new land, promising to transform him into a great nation, to bless him, and to make his name renowned. Furthermore, God pledges this specific land to Abraham and his descendants. This divine promise is elaborated in subsequent scriptures, where the boundaries of the promised land are defined from the river of Egypt to the Euphrates. This land is bequeathed to Abraham's descendants through Isaac as a perpetual possession. This covenantal promise underpins the Jewish claim to the land of Israel and Jerusalem, viewing themselves as the rightful inheritors of this divine bequest. Many Christians also regard this covenant as ongoing and consequential, believing that God's promises are immutable and that the land of Israel was divinely granted to the Jewish people as part of his overarching plan. Thus, from this perspective, disputes over this land transcend mere political or territorial issues. They are perceived as challenges to God's eternal covenant and his divine intentions for Israel and the world. The Old Testament is filled with prophetic visions regarding the dispersal of the Jewish people, their subsequent exile, and their eventual reunification in the land of Israel. These prophecies foretell a period when Israel would be assembled once more from various nations and return to their ancestral lands, a belief that many Christians view as having commenced in the 20th century. A pivotal prophecy appears in the book of Ezekiel. In chapter 37, Ezekiel describes a vision of a valley strewn with dry bones, symbolizing the people of Israel. God reveals to Ezekiel that these bones will rise again, symbolizing the rejuvenation of Israel after long centuries in exile. God proclaims to the bones, "I will cause breath to enter you, and you shall live. I will put breath in you, and you shall live, and you shall know that I am the Lord." Ezekiel 37:5-6. Further on, God announces, "I will retrieve the Israelites from the nations where they have scattered. I will collect them from all around and lead them back to their homeland." Ezekiel 37:21. For many faithful, the establishment of Israel in 1948 marks the actualization of this prophecy. After almost 2,000 years away following the ruin of the Second Temple in 70 AD, the Jewish diaspora converged again in their historical territory, fulfilling biblical predictions. This reunion is regarded as a momentous miracle, heralding the commencement of the prophesied end times. Jerusalem stands as the epitome of God's prophetic vision, representing a pivotal location in the religious narratives of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Its significance is particularly emphasized within biblical prophecies. Jerusalem is portrayed as the chosen city, where God has decided to place his name and make his dwelling among his people. As declared in 2 Chronicles 6:6, God states, "I have now chosen Jerusalem for my name to reside there, and David to lead my people Israel." Throughout the scriptures, Jerusalem is consistently seen as the center of divine action on earth. It is the historical site where Abraham nearly offered Isaac as a sacrifice, where David founded his kingdom, and where Solomon built his temple, symbolizing God's abiding presence. In the Christian narrative, the city takes on further significance as the location of Jesus Christ's crucifixion and resurrection, thereby holding a central place in Christian belief as well. Jerusalem's prophetic importance goes beyond its historical significance, as outlined in the book of Zechariah, which casts the city as pivotal in the events of the end times. Zechariah 12:2-3 proclaims a future where Jerusalem becomes a focal point of international strife. "I will make Jerusalem a cup that causes staggering for all the surrounding peoples. Even Judah will be besieged as well as Jerusalem. On the day when all the nations of the earth gather against it, I will make Jerusalem an unyielding rock for all the nations. Anyone who tries to move it will hurt themselves." This prophecy predicts a scenario where nations will challenge Israel's hold on Jerusalem, but their efforts will be thwarted. Many Christians see the ongoing dispute over Jerusalem, with its contested status as a city claimed by both Israelis and Palestinians, as a direct manifestation of Zechariah's prophecy. The persistent controversy over Jerusalem's role is a central element in the Israel-Palestine conflict, with both sides asserting it as their capital. In 1967, amidst the Six-Day War, Israel took control of East Jerusalem, including the Old City. This marked the first time in nearly 2,000 years that the city was fully under Israeli control. Many Christians see this as a fulfillment of biblical prophecies about Israel's restoration, notably bringing the Western Wall, Judaism's most sacred site, back under Jewish stewardship. However, this event also escalated tensions with the Palestinians, who envision East Jerusalem as the capital of their prospective state. The Bible highlights Jerusalem's pivotal role in the eschatological conflicts of the end times. Apocalyptic scriptures, including the Book of Revelation, forecast a sequence of devastating wars culminating in Armageddon, a massive clash between the forces of good and evil. These prophecies pinpoint Jerusalem as the focal point of these apocalyptic events. Revelation 16:16 mentions, "Then they gathered the kings together to the place that in Hebrew is called Armageddon." The term Armageddon, originating from the Hebrew Har Megiddo, is identified with a valley near Jerusalem, believed to be the arena for this final showdown between the Antichrist and God's forces. In this decisive conflict, Jerusalem is foreseen as the vital locale where Christ will return to vanquish his foes and set up his 1,000-year reign. The book of Zechariah also discusses the ultimate showdown. The Lord will then emerge to combat those nations, just as he battles on a day of war. On that day, he will stand on the Mount of Olives to the east of Jerusalem. Zechariah 14:3-4. For many Christians who interpret the Israel-Palestine conflict through a lens of prophecy, the ongoing strife surrounding Jerusalem signals that these events foretold for the end times are approaching. The fight over Jerusalem is regarded not merely as a struggle for land, but as an element of a larger cosmic spiritual conflict between the forces of good and evil, with the city at the center of God's master plan for the world's ultimate salvation. For numerous Christians and Jews, the Israel-Palestine conflict transcends a mere geopolitical dispute, representing a spiritual warfare. From this perspective, Satan aims to demolish Israel and disrupt God's intentions for his people. The mounting opposition to Israel, whether from Palestinian factions, neighboring Arab states, or global detractors, is often interpreted as a manifestation of this broader spiritual conflict. This theme of spiritual beings influencing earthly leaders and disputes is also echoed in the book of Daniel. Daniel mentions angelic entities clashing with the Prince of Persia and the Prince of Greece, where spiritual beings symbolize the terrestrial forces of those nations. Many hold that similar spiritual entities influence today's conflicts over Israel, with demonic forces seeking to counteract God's plans. Additionally, the dispute over Jerusalem is viewed as a smaller representation of the broader spiritual confrontation between God's kingdom and the forces of darkness. For Christians, this battle extends beyond issues of national sovereignty or territorial lines. It's seen as pivotal to God's ultimate purpose of redeeming the world through Christ, who is prophesied to return and govern from Jerusalem, thereby establishing his everlasting kingdom. Jerusalem remains at the epicenter of this political and spiritual conflict due to its immense religious importance. The control of East Jerusalem, claimed by Palestinians as the capital of their prospective state, continues to be a significant obstacle in peace negotiations. The global community, including entities like the United Nations, has not acknowledged Israeli sovereignty over East Jerusalem, considering it occupied land. The concept of a two-state solution, which imagines a sovereign state of Palestine alongside Israel, is still the most commonly advocated resolution to the conflict. Yet, despite years of talks, a lasting settlement remains elusive, with both parties entrenched in their positions on critical issues such as borders, Jerusalem's status, security measures, and the rights of Palestinian refugees. Whether approached as a matter of spiritual warfare or as a political dispute, it is evident that the Israel-Palestine conflict is woven into a broader narrative that has evolved over thousands of years and could still influence the trajectory of global history. What are your views? Is the Israel-Palestine conflict fundamentally a spiritual battle, a political issue, or a combination of both? Share your thoughts in the comments, and remember to subscribe to Spiritual Stories for more in-depth analysis of how ancient prophecies are shaping our contemporary world.